Quick show of hands, how many people have read Autobiography of a Yogi? I figured there had to be some of us in this audience. Cool. Keep your hand up if you've read it more than one time. Right on. Keep your hand up if you've read it more than 30 times. My hand has to go down too. That's an aggressive number of readings. So I wanted to explore in this talk what Steve Jobs could have possibly learned from Paramahansa Yogananda. Steve Jobs discovered Autobiography of a Yogi at the age of 17 and reportedly read it every single year of his life till he passed away in 2011 at the age of 56. So that's nearly 40 times. Not only that, but he gifted it to every single person that came to his funeral services. So I thought, as a devotee and a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda's teachings, and somebody who has somehow been tricked into reading the book about 11 times in the last 4 years, that there had to be something that Steve Jobs received from this book. The first time I read the book, the first time I finished the book, I should say, my wife was in natural labor with our son, who's now 4, and she was heading into transition, and it was the third delivery in our family, so I was kind of there, kind of reading. And and I was so fascinated by these yogis heading into Mahasamadhi, consciously withdrawing their spirit from the body and leaving their body left in lotus posture, these amazing feats that are described in Autobiography of a Yogi. And she said, "Chris, please, I'm giving birth here, let's not talk about death." And 4 years later, I had the honor of sitting at my stepfather's side as he was passing away, reading him the same stories. And that book has become such an integral part of my own journey, not only as a yogi and as a dad, but also, ironically, as a business person. And I want to make those correlations to Steve Jobs' life. Nearly 40 times is an aggressive number, as I said. But what's even more fascinating is that Steve Jobs was an espoused Zen Buddhist. Even more fascinating is that later in his own biography, Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, right at the tail end, he said, "I'm facing death. I'm succumbing to pancreatic cancer, and I have maybe a 50-50 chance of believing in God right now. I'm still not sure." And if who's read Autobiography of a Yogi, you know that book is kind of dripping with love of God, love of divine consciousness. So it's kind of a contradiction for me. I wondered how he could go back to that well so many times and still not be convinced. So what was he getting out of it? That's the conversation I'd like to have. And also we have to explore the well-known legends that Steve Jobs was a rather fiery personality. He was not a yogi in the humble, quiet, simple, type of way. He was almost overcome with passion at all times. So how do we reconcile these things? So what I did, my method and my research for this book for this talk was to take his biography out of the library again, reread it again. I happen to always either be listening to the audio version of Autobiography of a Yogi by Ben Kingsley or reading it, so I could kind of compare the two as I went through it and see what Steve Jobs could have learned from it. And the central theme that Walter Isaacson covers in the biography of Steve Jobs over and over again, this three-legged stool, if you will, that encompassed Steve's vision, Steve's leadership style, and ultimately his enduring legacy in the culture of the company he created. Focus, simplicity, and passion. Are there any companies that exist in this world that wouldn't kill to have just more of these? We exalt Apple as an example of innovation and success, and I was talking to Gina backstage, another speaker. She's like, "I'm tricked into buying the iWatch. It's got to happen. It's going to end up in the drawer with all my other watches because I have to have it." But it's because they continually focus on making our lives more simple. They drown out all the other noise of what the market is saying. They use intuition to figure out what they want to develop next. And then they have the passion it takes to not only innovate it and to think different, but to ship it. I love this quote by Robert Friedland, who was an early influence on Steve Jobs. He was his kind of guru, if you will, back in his college days at Reed, his ill-fated college career at Reed University. He said, whatever Steve was interested in, he would generally carry to an irrational extreme. So think about focus turns into obsessiveness. Think about simplicity. It turns into living in a mansion with no furniture, inviting over your executive board or the heads of these other companies or vendors to sit on a barren floor because you just can't quite trouble yourself to find the right furniture. Think about passion taken to its extreme, standing in somebody's face and screaming at them that their work is shit. I mean, it's intense, right? But that same passion is what created the innovation that all of us rely on almost minute to minute. A little discovery, I've had so many synchronicities developing this talk, and one of them was kind of amazing. On page 183, I believe, I remembered that my uncle Matt worked for Steve Jobs. He was an early employee for Steve at Apple headquarters. He ran the floor where they were producing the Macintosh. And his quote, he kind of filed him in the last bucket. There was no spiritual journey for Steve Jobs. He was a real pain in the what to work for. And he said it took so much energy to fight him, and it was usually over something so pointless that he finally just had to quit. Last week, I had the honor of interviewing Brother Bhumananda, who's a minister and monk in the monastic order of Self-Realization Fellowship. That's the organization that Paramahansa Yogananda founded to carry on his work and teachings. And interestingly, Brother Bhumananda, his name means infinite bliss, by the way. And I could tell you 5 minutes in the dude's presence, you feel it. I had the honor of doing some spiritual counseling with him on my own practice a few months ago. And I asked him, the first question I had for him is, why have you read it so many times? What did you get out of it? And he said, Chris, when you go to the ocean with a little cup of water and you fill it up, you end up with a little cup of ocean water. But when you go to an ocean with a much larger vessel that you expand through meditation, through Kriya Yoga, through the practice, you are able to hold so much of what that ocean will just give and give and give. And his theory was that that's what Steve Jobs got from the Autobiography of a Yogi. He said he's seen it many times before that there's plenty of non-devotees and non-disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda who read the book multiple times and can't stop reading it, and they view Yogananda as a Jagat Guru. Has anybody ever heard that term before? It was kind of new for me. It means guru of the world. That something in the guru's words resonates so deeply at a soul level with somebody like a Steve Jobs that he just had to keep coming back to it. He filed it as truth, and as a Zen Buddhist, he was definitely interested in experiencing truth on his own terms. He filed it as truth, and he kept coming back to that well. No limitations. I would say if there's a central theme of Autobiography of a Yogi, it's that the divine potential of human consciousness is truly unlimited, and that we can get there through diligent, regular practice. And I would think that somebody like Steve Jobs, who is so relentlessly driven and focused and clearly had spiritual leanings, would thoroughly enjoy reading a book or giving a book to his friends that was truly about no limitations. The first time you read the book, you kind of read it with a skeptical mind, thinking like, there's a lot of miracles happening here. I mean, the guy died one chapter, he was resurrected in the next chapter. I mean, come on, like, what's going on here? But through years of meditation and through multiple readings, you realize that all of the science behind the miracles, all of the is much factual evidence that can be supportive of those types of things, is all provided. Who was at Deepak's talk last night? Deepak Chopra's talk? So you witnessed the outpouring and torrent of wisdom that he unleashed on us all. I was just riveted. Non-local consciousness, local consciousness, yes, 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 more. It's all about no limitations. And Steve Jobs was actually known for this thing called the reality distortion field, where he would bend timelines and facts and time in general just to pull people into his maniacal quest to create something that was actually impossible to create. He would convince them they could do it. He was not concerned with limitations. Actualize yourself. Mark Benioff's talk, the CEO of Salesforce.com, he's the one who let the cat out of the bag about Steve gifting this to every single person at his funeral. And his big takeaway was he considered Steve a guru of Silicon Valley, and Steve's message, his departing message, was not a material one. It was absolutely a spiritual one, and it was actualize yourself. Work on yourself. Do the work to figure it out. I love this quote because intuition to me has been by far one of the biggest byproducts of my meditation practice. Intuition is a very powerful thing, more powerful than intellect. It's had a big impact on my work. And this next quote, to me, shows that intuition, it could be argued, is actually what built Apple and sustains Apple. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do, meaning consumers. And our task is to read things that are not yet on the page. Who needs more of that in their business? Less market research, more of that. We need to do this thing because we know it in our heart. Intuition. Audacity and tenacity. Audacity multiplied by tenacity. It's not enough just to think different, or to, one of my other favorite Steve Jobs quotes, it's better to be a pirate than to join the Navy. You ever heard that quote? It's a great one, that rebel spirit. It takes audacity to think different and to come up with these innovations, but it takes a phenomenal, almost insane level of tenacity to actually ship it. To integrate all those software platforms, all those complex things into something simple and ship it takes tenacity. The same tenacity that drove a young Swami to build a worldwide organization starting on the shores of Encinitas, California, just north of San Diego. Swami Yogananda arrived here as 27 years old, did not speak English, and all of a sudden thousands of people start showing up to every time he speaks. This was not a time when Swamis were a common occurrence in America. It took a lot of tenacity. It's all woven throughout all of Yogananda's teachings and the book. I'd like to talk as I finish up here about kind of what keeps me up at night and why I'm here as a participant first. And first of all, for anybody who voted, I was so blown away by all the People Stage submissions. You know, you do what you do as a competitor. You watch all the ones, you're like, they're all so amazing. I'm gonna not get this. I want it so bad, but they're all so amazing. I wanna thank you for the opportunity to share this. But how do we apply these teachings in our own company? I work for a company called Centro. It's a rapid growth digital media startup headquartered in Chicago. And the things that keep me up night are the same things that probably keep all of you up at night. All of these different inputs into our people's minds that ultimately can lead to burnout or fatigue, turnover. Where does this go? How do we process these things? When I give a new hire talk every single month to our company, I plant the seed early that the only antidote I've ever found in my crazy digital media life is meditation, bar none. And slowly but surely, the call will come back from them, from the new hires, either the first day or the third week or third year, that, oh yeah, is the meditation stuff still up there? And I always say, yes, it's still up there. I think it's an amazing opportunity to be at the intersection of fast-moving technology and the spread of consciousness. And I think that Steve Jobs stands as an amazing example of that. And sure, he was not a perfect human. He had his faults, but he also had those two worlds. He almost stood with one foot firmly grounded in technology and the cutting edge, and one foot firmly grounded in spirituality. Here's the takeaways. If you haven't yet, read it. If you want to be challenged, if you want to challenge your own ideas of limitations or just be inspired, check out the book. And I thought it'd be fun to keep the conversation going. So if you want to nerd out with me and use a hashtag, Jobs Yogi, I've been just sharing some thoughts on this and some more research, because now it's like the floodgates are open, and my friends who spend time in Buddhist monasteries are, here's what I think about Steve Jobs. There's a conversation happening now. So if you want to add to that, I'd love for you to hashtag that, and I'll be happy to respond. Thanks so much, everybody. My name is Kristoffer Carter. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Steve Jobs discovered Autobiography of a Yogi at the age of 17 and reportedly read it every single year of his life till he passed away in 2011 at the age of 56. So that's nearly 40 times. Not only that, but he gifted it to every single person that came to his funeral services. So I thought, as a devotee and a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda's teachings, and somebody who has somehow been tricked into reading the book about 11 times in the last 4 years, Autobiography of a Yogi. And she said, Chris, please, I'm giving birth here, let's not talk about death. And 4 years later, I had the honor of sitting at my stepfather's side as he was passing away, reading him the same stories. And that book has become such an integral part of my own journey, not only as a yogi and as a dad, but also, ironically, as a business person. And I want to make those correlations to Steve Jobs' life. Nearly 40 times that there had to be something that Steve Jobs received from this book. The first time I read the book, the first time I finished the book, I should say, my wife was in natural labor with our son, who's now 4, and she was heading into transition, and it was the third delivery in our family, so I was kind of there, kind of reading. And, and I was so fascinated by these yogis heading into Mahasamadhi, consciously withdrawing their spirit from the body and leaving their body left in lotus posture. These amazing feats that are described in Autobiography is an aggressive number, as I said. But what's even more fascinating is that Steve Jobs was an espoused Zen Buddhist. Even more fascinating is that later in his own biography, Steve Jobs by Walter Isaacson, right at the tail end, he said, "I'm facing death. I'm succumbing to pancreatic cancer, and I have maybe a 50-50 chance of believing in God right now. I'm still not sure." And if who's read Autobiography of a Yogi, you know that book is kind of dripping with quick show of hands, how many people have read Autobiography of a Yogi? I figured there had to be some of us in this audience. Cool. Keep your hand up if you've read it more than one time. Right on. Keep your hand up if you've read it more than 30 times. My hand has to go down too. That's an aggressive number of readings. So I wanted to explore in this talk what Steve Jobs could have possibly learned from Paramahansa Yogananda.